Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Joan. We're going to take a look at a different kind of video today. Apparently, Marvel has decided that they are a lifestyle brand and they make all these videos and have a video podcast. So, as a longtime Marvel fan who hasn't checked in a while, I thought I'd watch these videos after getting some text from friends who are like, you cannot believe what they're doing. Okay, so we're going to watch this, Joan. You stay comfy. Oh, wait a minute. What was that? Was that a purse? Oh my God. It's Captain Marvel purses. Who the hell would buy a Captain Marvel purse? You got to be kidding me. And a Thanos purse. Who would buy that? What? A 10-year-old? Maybe? X-Men socks. Those look like Jim Lee X-Men illustrations. I don't know what those are. No, those look good.
Welcome back to the Women of Marvel, and we are here today with...
What is this, Women of Marvel?
I'm
Judy Steffens, Sana Amat.
I'm Sana Amanov, and we are joined by Alice Rosenthal. Hi. So,
Who?
Alice...
Why wouldn't you put her name up too? All right, this is already like super woke and annoying, and not a comic book store. Okay, not at all the lifestyle. I don't have to watch any more of this. I don't have to watch one more second of it, and I won't. Comic book stores, for those of you who don't know, because I, Joan, I know you're very upset. All right, are you okay? Comic book stores were kind of like somebody's basement, right? There's a bunch of junk, usually smelled like cheese and feet, and just boxes and boxes and dusty boxes of comic books. And the kind of people who would hang out in there would be guys like me, other overweight guys who like comic books, and you'd come into the store, usually on comic day. Sometimes, depending on when comic day was, they moved it around a few times in the history. You might come in on that Saturday and you get your books and you see what's on the rack, and you might discuss what's currently going on in Marvel or DC or whatever universe you were into. And, it's mainly a collector's hobby, but also a reader hobby. There were almost no women in the store. Okay? And the reason was women didn't read comics. The demographics haven't really changed. It's still mostly men. At least mostly men in the stories that were written, because they were about guys with big muscles punching monsters. Sometimes there'd be some hot women in it too, but it wasn't about that. It was mainly about heroes doing heroic things. And usually it was about a fight. Some kind of fight, or a build-up and then a fight. Generally speaking, women weren't interested in those kinds of stories. They still aren't. Generally. Yes, there were a few fangirls who would be on the fringes and they'd be into it. But they were on the end of the bell curve. They weren't your average girl. Your average girl, and it's still true today, is more interested in relationships. They prefer stories that are about men and women getting together, or sometimes women and women, sometimes men and men, whatever. They're interested in that dynamic between characters. They're not interested in seeing the characters punch each other. It's always the way it's been. And since comic books were mainly about that since, the 60s, they tended not to come to the comic book stores. Now, some of the women who come into the comic book store, and I used to manage a comic book store, they would show up and they would buy, a lot of them would buy erotic comics. They loved them because erotic comics tended to be about relationships. There were never any violence, usually, and they'd have sex in them, but it wasn't just sex. It was like huge build up and then very sexy stuff. That's what erotic comics are. Not porn comics, they were erotic comics. And so to have three women sit around a table and gossip about things to buy is extremely girly. But it has nothing to do with the Marvel lifestyle, which is ironic because you can see on the boxes here, on the gifts all over the thing, are pictures of the heroes, Captain America, Spider-Man, and they're all and the Hulk. They're all jumping and they're muscly, and they're doing, but they're ignoring them, right? They're chatting away about what are we gonna buy, because again, women tend to like to shop. Men are hunters, women are gatherers, and that is translated into shopping. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not knocking women because they like what they like. I don't have a compelling need to go to a shoe store and make sure they cater to men. I don't have a compelling need to make sure that soap operas, which are mainly aimed at women, feature a knockdown, drag-out fight every episode and car stunts. There's no need for that. That's mostly for women. Comics are mostly for men, boys, and men. Generally, the audience has been 18 to 35. What Marvel is doing is trying to hammer a square peg into a round hole. They're trying to turn the comic book industry, specifically the Marvel comic book industry, which is a large portion of the industry, you have to understand. Generally, Marvel, back in the day, at one point, they had 70% of the market. I don't think it's that high anymore. It's probably lower. They've been bleeding fans. And, the percentage of women fans is probably up for Marvel because they've just been hammering female stuff into their comics. But that's not because more women are reading comics. It's because most of the women have stayed, but the men keep leaving. There's nothing in it for them. When you take a character like Thor and you emasculate him and then replace him with a female character, all you've done is piss off the old fans. You haven't gained any new fans. Women weren't waiting in the wings by the thousand going, ugh, I would read Thor if only Thor was a woman. No, that audience doesn't exist. They're trying to artificially create that audience with this to prove to everyone, see, women are better. We're better at making comics. No, you're not. As evidenced by the fact that you're doing a podcast and turning Marvel into a lifestyle brand. The lifestyle was going to a comic book store, a smelly, dusty comic book store, and talking about fictional characters beating the hell out of each other. That's not much of a lifestyle. I know, because I lived that lifestyle. And I know all the guys who lived it. A lot of them. I shouldn't say all of them. A lot of them. And we were all kind of the same. Kind of introverted guys who like these kinds of stories. Again, it's not the kind of stories women like. And the fact that a lot of the Marvel guys I've heard are hired because of their Twitter following, and then their comics still don't really sell as much as they have Twitter followers, shows you the mentality. It's this image that they're trying to promote. See, my thinking is that the people in corporate don't give a crap about the comics. They're going to stop publishing them relatively soon. They're going to license them out because that's a win-win in terms of the money. And they never, ever cared about the comics because, in a big major corporation, comic books, they just don't bring in enough money here. Even if you had the Japanese model, which brings in billions, the best year in comics in the United States, I think, if you added up everything, was like $1 billion. But that included movies and merchandise and all that stuff. In Japan, it's regularly 3 billion because comics are considered, they're more diverse. They're more of an art form. People don't have a hang up about reading a comic. You're not considered an idiot if you read a comic. United States, there's still that hang up. Even now that you're trying to make all these comics appeal to girls. Here are the comics girls like, generally. Again, this is all general. They tend to like manga, the Japanese comics. They tend to like that style. One of the reasons they like them is a lot of those comics, they're relationship based because they don't have superheroes really in Japan. There's a few of them. One Punch Man, really great. But a lot of their comics, they're about all different things. And they do have a whole because they have so many comics, they have a whole subsection of comics that are about relationship and love and romance. There's a lot of erotic comics, a lot of porno comics in Japan. But the thing is, women in this country, American comic book fans who are female, tend to love manga. Because a lot of those mangas are not people punching each other all the time. They're about relationships. They also have, really good detail on the clothes and the stuff in the comic. So that's something that a lot of girls can get behind. They want to see the characters in different clothes and their relationships and all that kind of stuff. That detail is appealing to them. So if you were going to do this, the thing to do would be to start a separate imprint and just do a bunch of new characters. And you don't need to feminize Marvel Comics in order to achieve your goals. Because you could piggyback the female comics in the comic book stores. Some of the men would read some of them, but generally you would give the men an opportunity to bring their wives and girlfriends and daughters into the hobby. What you're essentially doing is bringing the wives and girlfriends and daughters into the hobby while driving the men out. They don't want this kind of stuff, generally. That's why, by the way, sales of the old comics, they're going through the roof. Everybody's buying and selling that. I mean, the fans that are left, the fans that haven't been completely driven out of the hobby. But you're not creating any new fans with this. So this is a very short-term, I think, foolish gambit on Marvel's part. I'm gonna watch just a little bit more just to see if any of this gets better.
Who are you? What do you do? Guys, thanks for asking. I've worked at Marvel for 8-9 years. Can't keep track of this.
Yeah, so, and here we have a Marvel Creative Services person. I mean, this is not what we want to even see. And you got Captain America's shield in the background. Why don't we just have, Pam from HR come in while we're at it? Who is this woman?
Point. And I am privileged and excited to be working with the Creative Services Department. So
what are you going to interview all the employees of Marvel just because they're women? This is ridiculous. What next? Let's meet Fred, the guy who works at the loading dock. Hey, how you doing, Fred? Oh, I love unloading and loading up the comics. I mean, all this stuff is nonsense. A channel... Excuse me. I'm choking on my words. A Marvel Comics channel. And they already kind of have them. There's a million podcasts about comics. There's probably more podcasts than there are new comics coming out. Talks about the characters. The emphasis here is on the merchandise. It appears to me. Oh, there's more characters in the background. It looks like the Beast. This one's just all Spider-Man. The merchandise isn't why we came into the stores. We came into the stores to read the stories. We were hooked on the stories. We wanted to see what happened next, how things would progress. There was a great editorial sense at the comic book companies up until And in the 90s, it started to go, and it never really recovered. After the 90s boom, everything just kind of went to hell. So, no one's reading this, in my view. You're not bringing any new readers because you can't just keep enticing people like you're on QVC or something. You have to entice people with the story and new characters. Where are the new characters? That's another thing. You know, as much as they didn't introduce enough new characters when I was reading comics, they would once in a while. I mean, Marvel literally has hundreds of characters you've probably never heard of because they were never very big, or they got big for like a year and then just died. So, I don't know what you're thinking, Marvel. This lifestyle brand, this is like a waste. They've got like 50 episodes of this. Who would watch it? Let's see. You got 20,000 views, about 1,000 upvotes, and about a 250, almost 250 downvotes. So, I mean, that's like a quarter of the people didn't like it. Oh, allow me to add to that. Dislike. Dislike Marvel. Dislike.